My name is Julia Carson. And if you'd asked anyone in my town a year ago who I was, they would have said, "Oh, her. That woman who ran off and left her kids." Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. That's the story my ex-husband told. That's the story the court believed. That's the story I lived under like a cloud I couldn't escape. But none of it was true. I didn't leave. I was erased. Let me take you back. It started with the day I returned home from work and found the locks changed. No warning. No confrontation. Just my key not working. And a neighbor pretending not to notice me standing on the porch with tears in my eyes and my hands full of groceries. Inside that house were my daughters. Abby, age 9, and Ellie, just 6. Also inside, my ex-husband Brian Carson, the man I once believed I'd grow old with. We had been separated for 2 months. I had been staying in a small rental while we tried to work on ourselves, with the promise we'd alternate staying with the kids. But Brian had a different plan. I didn't know it then, but while I was trying to rebuild my confidence in therapy and picking up extra shifts to cover expenses, he was planting seeds, talking to his sister, a social worker, his cousin, a police officer, his father, the mayor of our small coastal town. And when I protested at the door, Brian stepped out, not angrily but calmly, like he'd rehearsed every word. "You abandoned the girls, Julia. You left. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" I stared at him, stunned. "What? I didn't leave them. I moved out because you told me I needed space." "I have it all documented," he interrupted, holding up a thick envelope. "Emails, texts. You said you needed time. I'm not stopping you from having it." He closed the door in my face before I could scream. The next day, a temporary custody order landed in my inbox, filed under emergency grounds, claiming I was emotionally unstable, claiming the girls cried at the mention of my name. The town whispered. The lawyer I scraped money together to hire barely tried. And when I tried to speak in court, I was told, "This isn't about your feelings, Ms. Carson. This is about the children's safety." I was granted supervised visits, 1 hour, once a week, in a sterile office with a clipboard-wielding stranger. Every time I walked into that room, my daughters looked smaller. Ellie had stopped wearing her hair in the little braids I used to do every night. Abby didn't speak, just kept her eyes on the corner clock. I wanted to grab them and scream, but I couldn't. That would prove what they claimed, that I was unstable. So I played the part of the good little mother who smiled and said, "How's school?" while their father rewrote the past. My father had died 2 years before all this. Judge Thomas Delaney, retired, a man of dignity, stern but fair. He used to say, "Everyone lies eventually. Your job is to figure out why." We weren't always close when I was younger, but after Mom passed, he softened. He helped me get through law school, helped me when Brian lost his job. He'd even offered to pay for marriage counseling when things first started cracking. But there was one conversation I couldn't shake. About a year before he passed, we were having coffee on the back porch of his house, the same one I grew up in. He was staring out at the ocean, that quiet stare he got when he was thinking too far into the future. "Julia," he said suddenly, "do you trust Brian?" Blink. "Of course. I mean, we have issues, but he's a good father." Dad didn't smile. He just nodded once, then added, "If you're ever in a situation where you feel like everything's been taken from you, check the safe." At the time I thought he meant the gun safe. But when I looked after he passed, it was empty. I didn't think about it again, until everything collapsed. One night, after another soul-crushing court appearance, I went to my childhood home. It had been sitting empty since Dad passed. I hadn't had the heart to sell it. I sat in the living room floor, surrounded by unopened mail and half-empty boxes. I was flipping through an old photo album when something fell out. An envelope. No stamp. Just my name. Inside was a bank key, small brass with a faint engraving. First National Box 481. Froze. The next morning I went to the bank. The woman behind the desk gave me a look when I handed her the key. "I'll need to verify you're an authorized user." "I'm his daughter," I said. "Thomas Delaney. He passed last year." She typed something then paused. "It's still active. And yes, you're listed. Let me take you back." The vault was cold. She pulled out a narrow metal drawer and placed it on the table. Inside, a single envelope, yellowing with age, sealed with red wax. And a post-it note in my father's handwriting. "Use this only if your character is questioned, or your children are taken from you unjustly." My hand shook as I opened it. It was a letter, dated 6 years ago, signed by Brian, notarized, "To whom it may concern." I, Brian Carson, advised and pressured my wife, Julia Delaney Carson, to take responsibility for a financial decision that was originally mine. She agreed under emotional duress and threats of job loss. This letter acknowledges her innocence should any future legal or personal disputes arise related to said incident. My eyes burned. This was from the scandal that almost cost me my license. Brian had convinced me to take the fall for a financial discrepancy at the non-profit he worked for. Something minor at the time, or so I thought. He swore it would never come up again. He made me sign a fake statement. Buried it. Moved on. But now I had his own words. In his own handwriting. Notarized. Dated. Sealed. Hidden away by my father. I was holding a confession. A written lie Brian never imagined would see daylight again. And in that moment I knew. Everything was about to change. I stared at the letter for nearly an hour, rereading every word until the paper trembled in my hands. It wasn't just a document. It was my father's final act of protection. Somehow, he had sensed all of this long before it happened, and quietly left behind the one thing that could restore everything I'd lost. But even with the letter in hand, I knew I couldn't just walk into court and wave it around. Brian was cunning. His family even more so. If I made one wrong move, they'd twist the narrative again. Claim it was forged, claim it was irrelevant, claim I was desperate. I had to be strategic. And above all, I had to be quiet. I met with a new attorney, someone from out of town with no ties to Brian or the Carson name. Her name was Claire Grady, a fierce woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for injustice. I handed her the letter across a small table in her office. She read it in silence, then looked up slowly. "You've been sitting on this. I just found it yesterday." She leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "This changes everything. Not just for the custody case, but for him. This letter directly contradicts sworn testimony from your ex during your disciplinary hearing 2 years ago." My chest tightened. "You mean?" "I mean, if we use this right, it won't just make you look innocent. It'll make him look like a criminal." Claire got to work immediately. She filed a petition to reopen the custody hearing on the grounds of newly discovered evidence and potential perjury. But we didn't attach the letter. Not yet. She knew they'd try to intercept it, discredit it, maybe even bribe someone to make it disappear. So instead, we sent a notice of deposition. We would be questioning Brian under oath, again, about the financial scandal he had previously denied under penalty of perjury. When Brian received the notice, he tried to call me. 4 missed calls in an hour. Then a message. "What are you doing? You're going to make things worse for yourself. For all of us." I didn't reply. For once, the silence was mine to give. 3 days before the hearing, Claire arranged a private meeting with the judge overseeing the custody case, Judge Marilyn Kravitz. She was new in town, recently appointed, and not affiliated with any of the small-town power circles Brian's family dominated. Claire submitted the letter to her chambers under seal. The judge's face remained unreadable as she read it. When she finished, she looked at me, her voice measured. "Do you have reason to believe this was kept from you intentionally?" "Yes. My father gave me the key before he passed. I believe he feared something like this would happen." She nodded slowly. "Then I will allow the letter into evidence. But be prepared. Mr. Carson's attorneys will challenge every word." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I watched the clock from midnight to sunrise. I thought about Abby and Ellie. About the way their eyes had dulled over the past year. About the way they flinched when I reached to hug them during supervised visits. They thought I left them. They thought I chose something else. But I never had a choice. I was cornered, erased, and locked out of my own life. Now I had one shot to get it all back. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Brian walked in with his signature smug calm, dressed like he was heading to a charity gala. His father sat behind him. So did his sister, the one who helped file the emergency custody order against me. Their family moved like a machine, each one smiling, greeting people, acting as though they were pillars of the community. When I walked in with Claire, no one greeted me. No one smiled. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for them. The first half of the hearing was procedural. Claire made her argument for reconsideration. Brian's lawyer objected, claiming the letter was irrelevant to the custody matter and clearly fabricated for sympathy. Then Claire stepped forward, calm and unshaken. Your Honor, we are prepared to submit handwriting verification, notarization records, and an affidavit from the notary public who authenticated this letter 6 years ago. We are also prepared to submit disciplinary hearing transcripts where Mr. Carson gave sworn testimony that directly contradicts the contents of this letter. In other words, we're not here to beg. We're here to prove fraud. The judge read the letter aloud. Each word echoed in the silent courtroom like a bell tolling. I watched Brian's face as she read it. The color drained from him. His jaw clenched. And when the judge looked at him and asked, Mr. Carson, would you like to respond to the letter submitted by the petitioner? He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. His lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, we need a recess. Denied, the judge said, voice sharp. Brian adjusted his tie. This letter was written during a time of stress and confusion. It doesn't represent the truth of our situation. But it does represent your handwriting, correct? Claire asked. Brian said nothing. I'll ask again, Claire said, her voice steady. Did you write this letter? The room was dead silent. Finally he exhaled. Yes, but... No further questions, Claire said and sat. There was a pause. The judge scribbled something down. Then she looked at me. Ms. Carson, given the weight of this new evidence and the implications for prior testimony, I am granting a motion to reopen the custody case. Effective immediately, the court is suspending the previous custody order and placing the children in temporary joint custody, with unsupervised access restored. Gasp. The room spun. I didn't even realize I was crying until Claire put a tissue in my hand. Brian stood outraged. You can't just take my kids from me. The judge glared at him. Mr. Carson, sit down. Or I will hold you in contempt. The gavel came down like thunder. It was the first sound of justice I'd heard in years. Outside the courtroom, as reporters began to gather, I walked straight to the parking lot and sat in my car, sobbing into my hands. I hadn't won yet. But I wasn't invisible anymore. And soon, the truth was going to spread faster than their lies ever did. The joint custody order was just the beginning. For the first time in over a year, I got to pick up my daughters without someone monitoring the clock or scribbling on a clipboard. When I arrived at Brian's house, our old house, Abby and Ellie were already waiting by the door with their backpacks on. No hugs, no tears, just wide, confused eyes. Ellie stepped forward first. Is it true? She whispered. I knelt down. That I never left you. That I wanted you every second. Yes, sweetheart. That's true. She broke. Threw her arms around my neck and held me like she used to when she was 3 and afraid of thunderstorms. Abby followed a beat later, quieter, older, but clinging just as tightly. It wasn't a full reunion. Not yet. There was still distance in their eyes. Still that subtle sense that they didn't know who to trust. But it was the start of something. The first step back. Meanwhile, Brian wasn't done trying to control the narrative. He began leaking to the press, suggesting I'd forged the letter, that my father was mentally declining when he added my name to the deposit box, that this was all some elaborate revenge plot. But none of it stuck. Claire had already filed a motion for an evidentiary hearing on the original fraud. That hearing would be public. And for the first time, people in town started asking questions. A neighbor I hadn't spoken to in months stopped me at the grocery store. "We had no idea, Julia. He said you ran off." The local paper ran a quiet retraction buried on page 6. "New evidence emerges in Carson custody dispute." But I didn't care about headlines. Cared about court. The evidentiary hearing took place in the same courtroom where I had once been told I was unfit. The same place where my ex's family had smiled smugly while I broke apart silently on the stand. This time it was Brian on the defense. Claire brought forward documentation. The notarized letter. A transcript of the ethics hearing from 2 years ago, where Brian had denied any wrongdoing. A bank statement proving the safety deposit box had been opened and paid for by my father, 5 years before his death. And finally a surprise. An audio file. It was a voicemail from Brian to his former co-worker, dated 3 months before our separation. In it he said, "I'm working on something. She's going to be out of the picture soon. I just need her to sign a few things." When the audio played in court, Brian's face twisted. The judge asked him if it was his voice. He didn't answer. Instead, his lawyer stood and asked for a recess, which was denied again. In her ruling, Judge Kravitz declared that not only was the letter valid, but that Brian had knowingly presented false testimony during my prior disciplinary hearing. She referred the matter to the state bar and the DA's office for potential charges. The courtroom was stunned. Even Brian's own lawyer looked shaken. But the final twist came after. A week after the hearing, I received a phone call from the attorney who managed my father's estate. He asked if I had received the contents of the safety deposit box in full. "I got the letter," I said. "It was everything." He paused. "Actually, there was one more envelope in the bank's internal files. It was misplaced in their system. It's addressed to you. Dated a week before your father died." He mailed it to me. When I opened it, I found a short letter from my dad and a photocopy of a check. The check had been written by Brian, made out to a man named Robert Kessler. Amount, $15,000. I didn't recognize the name, but Claire did. Kessler was a private investigator. Turns out, Brian had hired him almost a year before the separation, to follow me, dig for dirt, gather anything he could spin into a case for unfit parenting. But I'd never done anything wrong. There was no affair, no abuse, no drugs, so they fabricated the story. And that $15,000 check was the price of betrayal. Claire submitted the evidence to the court. With that, the custody arrangement was changed again. Full legal and physical custody granted to me. Brian was permitted supervised visits, pending the criminal investigation. When the girls moved in with me, they brought only one suitcase each. Ellie carried a stuffed elephant I thought had been lost forever. Bea brought a journal. The first thing she said when we sat down in our new living room was, "Can we start over?" I nodded, unable to speak. We did more than start over. We built something new. Slowly, day by day. I went back to work at a new firm, one that didn't judge me based on rumors. Claire became a mentor and friend. And one rainy Sunday afternoon, I took my daughters to my father's old house. We stood in front of the back porch where he once warned me with quiet eyes and a simple question. "Do you trust him?" I hadn't known what to do with that question then. But now I understood. He wasn't warning me. He was preparing me. That letter in the safety deposit box wasn't just evidence. It was faith. His final way of saying, "I see you, believe you, and you're not crazy." And when people in town still whispered, because they always do, I no longer shrank. Because now when they say, "Is that the woman who left her kids?" someone else answers, "No, that's the woman who got them back." Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.